US, we are not yet using the ICD-11. We are using the ICD-10 still. As I was going through a lot of the updates, the ICD-11 codes are very, very similar to the ICD-10 codes, so you should be good there. And then just another heads up on that, according to this beautiful blue book, by the way, it's right here, if you haven't seen it. We don't have an idea of when we're going to transition to the ICD-11, so keep using the ICD-10 until someone tells you otherwise. Revised text is the biggest thing. It's really, really minor things, like instead of specify when, it's now specify if. Anything that has been changed, I went through on the PDF that you guys have access to. I bolded, underlined, and changed everything in red for all of the changes. So you can go ahead and take a look at all of that. And excuse me, I am 36 weeks pregnant. So I have a baby in my lungs. I'm going to sound like I'm out of breath quite a bit because he's growing and he's a very, very large. Then we have updates that have been made based around more recent research specific to changes made within prevalence, risk, and prognostic factors. A lot of what they've done is taken scientific findings and their goal is to just make it more evidence-based for us, which is pretty awesome. Continuing on, they added updates to the cultural and social structural issues. So they just brought more attention to what we're seeing culturally within our practices. They review diagnostic assessments to include the relevance to the social cultural norms and individual presentations. They did update some terminology, like no longer using terms racial and going with the term racialized. Then we move on to sex and gender differences. They added within, for specific disorders, a portion that says sex and gender related diagnostic issues. Not all of the disorders have that, it's just very specific for some of them. One of my very favorite things so far, which is such a weird thing to say, but it's probably because I'm a therapist and I work with suicide ideation like every day. But within one of the sections, they now have not really a diagnosis, but there's a code, a T code for non-suicidal self-injury and suicidal behavior that I think is really important. And my guess is in the future, as they continue to update and review the DSM-5, you're going to get a diagnosis with that. It's not yet a diagnosis, but it is something that we can use to bring attention to within all the clinical settings. And last but not least, there's a new diagnosis called prolonged grief disorder. We're going to turn to the DSM packet well, I guess we don't have a PowerPoint going now. So it's page 9 in the packet that I mentioned. Like I said, not a whole lot of changes here. Absolutely nothing changed with generalized anxiety. So a quick review. Anxiety and worry are supposed to occur for at least 6 months or longer. These individuals have control with controlling their worry, have difficulty controlling their worry, and they need at least 3 symptoms and that of the 5, which include restlessness or feeling heat up or on edge, being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating or having their mind going blank, irritability, muscle tension, or sleep disturbance. A lot of what I've seen as I've been doing this, and we'll get to depression after lunch, but a lot of the anxiety, we're seeing significant worry, feeling heat up, difficulty concentrating, and just like super low motivation. I think that's all I want to highlight there.
Okay.
And we'll move on to social anxiety, which is on page 5. Sorry, I'm going to pull up my little packet here. Within these, I should say too, in the packet, it's all, I went based on order that it is in the DSM, but we're piggybacking and jumping around because I went based off of what I see primarily. So generalized anxiety is probably the number one thing I'm seeing, followed by some social anxiety. These are the individuals, they're not going to school. There's a lot of avoidance, fear of walking hallways, schools, fear of judgment. The biggest thing I've been noticing within this is that, especially for high schoolers with Snapchat these days, they don't want to walk around in the hallways because I guess people are taking videos of them and then posting them and making fun of other people. So when talking with individuals who have social anxiety, it's really important to validate that there is some legit concern. And unfortunately, I don't know that schools can control that as much as I, as a therapist, would love for them to be able to. But we go over, what would that be like? How do we navigate that? And focusing primarily on that judgment piece, because social anxiety is all about the fear of judgment. A lot of what I've been seeing with that as well is just the full on not going to school. So if I'm afraid that I'm going to be judged, I might as well just not go at all. And especially the last couple of years, you've had options of online school. So, but this year, I don't think that's been an option. So we're having a significantly more challenging time getting those individuals with social anxiety back into school. And I think that is it. No big changes there on social anxiety. Panic attack specifier, which is page 7. Again, no changes. A lot of what I'm seeing is panic attacks. You can have a panic attack. It's literally any mental disorder. So primarily anxiety and depression. A lot of individuals, I would say with panic attacks, you're going to physically see what's happening for them. I had someone yesterday in my office doing an intake, and we talked about, if you're going to do group, you probably can't do volleyball. And it was very intense to see the shift from, I feel safe in this moment, to you're taking away volleyball, and now I'm going to cry and hyperventilate and not be able to regulate. So of course we did a lot of other things to help calm that down. But panic attacks, very, very common right now is what I've been seeing a lot of. Adjustment disorders, there are very minor changes here. That's on page 13. The biggest one is on letter D. The symptoms do not represent normal bereavement and are not better explained by prolonged grief disorder. So that new disorder I mentioned at the very beginning, they added in a little piece here just to make sure you guys are looking out for it. And then there's a specified if in red. This was something that I was reading last night. I found really, really interesting, talking about acute versus persistent. So adjustment disorders has to be within 6 months of the, within 3 months of the stressor occurring. And the difference between acute is the specifier can be used to indicate persistence of symptoms for less than 6 months. But then the persistent or chronic is specific to the duration of the disturbance being longer than 6 months. So I just like that because I'm usually like, okay, it's been longer than 6 months. Let's move on to an actual diagnosis. But it looks like in this case, that doesn't have to be the case if the stressor is still occurring. Page 26 has suicidal behavior updates. This is found in other conditions that may be a focus of clinical attention. If anybody uses the parent-child relational conflict code, that's where this one will also be found. There's I don't know what it is. They have 3 different parts to it. Your initial encounter, so if suicidal behavior is part of the initial encounter with the clinical presentation, a subsequent encounter, and then just a history of suicidal behavior. This is what I would say very, very common, at least, within the IOP at this point. More often than not, the only time you're going to use this as a code is if it's relevant to the treatment plan and when you're working with them. Non-suicidal self-injury. This one, it also has the current history of, that's down a little ways on the same page. Engaged. This is for individuals who have engaged in intentional self-inflicted damage to their body as a sort likely to induce bleeding, bruising, or pain in the absence of suicide intent. Okay, that's all we got for diagnosis right now. Any questions about updates? Okay, so for motivational interviewing, Jason reflected on this just a little bit, but starting out in our IOP 4 years ago, I think we did an awesome job, and when I say awesome job, we were like really connecting with individuals, and we were like, things were smooth going. And then all of a sudden COVID hit and something completely changed. And I found that with what I was seeing as leading group and then being in intakes with people, there was no motivation to try anything. They were just in this deep, dark, depressive, I don't know what to do, I just feel awful state. And this willfulness came up consistently where I want something to change, but I don't want to make any of those changes for myself. And we started trying to figure out how can we engage people, and especially our young people, in ways that's going to get them to use the skills and the tools that we're teaching. Because sometimes, I mean, with a lot of teens, they'll be like, "Oh, this is boring," which Bree talks about a lot, right? Or this isn't going to help me. That can help someone else, but that doesn't apply to me. So we have to engage them in different ways than what we were typically seeing prior to the start of COVID. A lot of what I really love about motivational interviewing is you guys are probably doing a lot of these skills already. You just don't know that you're doing them yet. So ideally, a lot of what I'm teaching you isn't new to you. It's how do you apply it in ways that are going to engage the adolescents a little bit more and get them more motivated and bought into the process that you are telling them. Miller and Rolnick are the founders of motivational interviewing, and I absolutely love this quote because it talks about motivational interviewing being a collaborative, person-centered form of guiding to elicit and strengthen motivation for change. Motivational interviewing isn't going to be for everybody, but our goal is to help find the individuals who are willing to work with you and get bought in. We're going to work on that motivation piece so that way we can focus on helping them get better. It is scientifically based. It's person-centered. We're based around conversations about change. So this, when clients can see the need for change, there's actually going to be change. So when we have those conversations, it needs to be an internal process in which they're seeing how it can apply to them. I think a lot of that adolescents these days are, again, that works for other people, that doesn't work for me. And we have to get them to see that what we can offer and how we can help them is actually beneficial to them. I will say there are always limits to this. So I will give you an example. I've been working with an individual for 2 years now who, when I started working with her, she was so anxious, and a little bit defiant, would not go to school at all, would in middle school throw like full-on temper tantrums, screaming, yelling at parents, wouldn't get out of the car. And if I used this with her 2 years ago, I don't think it would have worked. We have spent 2 years building relationships with relationship with each other. And only recently, in the last 8 months, have I tried a lot more of the motivational interviewing skills with her. And to see the wheels turning in her mind is really exciting because she's actually thinking about, oh, okay, well, I am a little bit defiant, yes, but here are some things that I can actually do that I want to change, versus 2 years ago, she didn't want anything to change. She was just fine throwing her tantrums and having mom and dad give in. 100%. So lots of fun things that you can do with motivational interviewing. Our goal is to guide our clients. There is a term that they call guiding within motivational interviewing. It is not to manipulate them. I think we all know that with the code of ethics, but just throwing that out there. Don't try to manipulate your clients into doing something. And we're going to talk about client ambivalence, which is very similar to DBT's willfulness and willingness skill. So ambivalence is this push and pull about something, especially change. These are the individuals that I see in my office that say, I want friends, but I don't want to put forth any effort into getting my friends. I want them to magically appear. And has anybody ever had a friend magically appear?
Just in my head.
In your head, right? Like,
Best friend ever.
they go with you wherever you want them to go. It's hard. So there's this want, but there's also this, I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. So it's feeling two different ways about one thing. I will say I had a client the other week who again, I get a lot of the school avoidance. I think you guys just refer that on to me. That's something I'm getting a lot of. But we're like working on doing online school, but working on getting those social connections in various ways. Her mom is a professor, so she gets to go to one of the schools around here and is working on connecting with people. And I think she got someone's phone number the other week, and we were talking about, okay, what are you gonna do with the phone number? Are you just gonna like keep it for fun or not rainy day? Are you gonna text them or whatever teens do these days? She was like, well, I just want it to magically be, I want them to magically just be my friend. And I said, oh, do you know that friends don't just like come magically? And she's like, what do you mean? Well, you actually have to like text them and do things and initiate the conversation. So we talked about what does that feel like? And she said, well, I guess that means I'm lazy. And I said, no, I'm not saying you're lazy. We just have to figure out what's going to motivate you, what's going to push you to follow through on some of those action pieces that we have been working on for quite a little bit of time. I'm finding that it's really uncomfortable to be in this space of ambivalence. So I want something, I'm not sure how to get it, and discomfort never feels good for anyone, let alone adolescents at this point. Adolescents they feel things on a completely different level than we do as adults right now. I think they've had a very hard time regulating emotions over the last couple of years. And so there's this fear of failure, they're uncomfortable with their emotions, they may not be able to even identify their emotions or what they're feeling in their body. There's avoidance. With avoidance and anxiety, the more you avoid, the more anxiety you're going to get from that. And then sometimes too, we just don't know where to start. And I think that's really hard for teens too, when they're feeling all of these things all at once building up, and they need some help just figuring out where to go next. Our goal is to help them navigate that through guiding. I always like to start with my clients too, on the next slide, talking about change requires tremendous courage. I don't think a lot of adolescents get the acknowledgement that what they're going through right now is very exhausting. The fact that they're trying anything is courageous. I don't feel like a lot of people acknowledge the vulnerability that it takes to make these changes. And one of the very first things I always do when someone comes into my office is I'm talking about how vulnerable they are in sharing with me, a practical stranger, about what they've been experiencing and how courageous they are for just being willing to share that little snippet with me. I know I was talking with Kari beforehand, and she said she acknowledged in a group, I think earlier this week, how courageous they are for just showing up for the day. And she said they all kind of looked at her funny, like, no one's ever said that before. And you'll get that, look, because they finally feel seen and it feels weird. And they're not sure how to react. I think sometimes they're like, are you being real with me right now? Or are you being like totally fake? So you might have to talk to them a little bit about not being honest with you. It's okay. So that's always what I start with when I walk in to my office. Our goal as therapists is to focus on the relationship. I know we talked about vulnerability with Bree at the very, very beginning of this morning. I don't know that you'll get very far with Bree unless you have some sort of a relationship with her, especially acknowledging that vulnerability. And we want our relationship with them to focus on empathy, honesty, collaboration, and courage. How many of you have told a teen to do something and they like willingly do it the first time? I don't know of many, by the way. Unless they're, huh?
Get candy.
Candy, okay, so we're like working on some buy-in. But a lot of times, youth aren't going to respond to you unless they feel like there's a reason they need to be doing it, if there's engagement for them. And so this is, you need to work with them on buying in, getting them to focus on their values and strengths. I know we did those values cards earlier. Jason's also created strengths cards that would be wonderful to use. Do we even have an example of those?
The strengths list is in the electronic only packet.
It's in the electronic only packet. But focusing on values, what moves you and motivates you to do these things, and what strengths do you have that you can really do these things and believe in yourself? That's another piece that a lot of teens have been responding really well to in my office. Another big thing, I think, when you work with adolescents and even individuals a lot younger, you also have, not only do you have your adolescent, but you have the parents as well. And the parents are going to expect something from you. They want to see those physical changes that they're wanting. They want their old kiddo back. That unfortunately, they're going to place a lot of that need for change on you as the clinician, because you're the person that's supposed to help their kid get better, right? It's all you. But with this, we cannot be advice giving. That means whatever parents want you to try and tell your adolescent in your office, you're going to have to find a way to tell the parent that this is the youth's journey and they have to make that choice. And as a parent, it's so hard to sit back and watch them make the choices that they're making and watch them doing the things that you can consider to be not the greatest choices. But they're not going to listen to us if we're going to say, yeah.
I might add one word to that list is authentic.
Authentic. She wants to add the word authentic.
Kids are so good at spotting the BS.
Yeah,
Everybody's fake.
that's actually in my notes. They're so good at spotting when you are being inauthentic. They can sniff out someone being fake from so far away. It's a wonderful skill that they have. Lessons that if you aren't being real with them, they're gonna know and they're not gonna do anything. They're gonna sit in your office and be the ones that don't talk to you. They're gonna be the ones that aren't trusting of you. If they aren't trusting, they're probably not gonna do a whole lot.
Yeah, your tone of voice too, they like know it and pick up on it. So I was doing a mindfulness grounding exercise with an adolescent client yesterday, and she hates doing mindfulness, like hates it. And I was just, trying to talk in a calm voice, and she was like, "Can you not do that?"
We're talking about turning ways for those who are
I was
online.
like, "Okay." And she's like, "That's better." I was like, "Oh, all right, on it." But yeah, even just changing your voice, they like
Yeah.
makes them uneasy.
Yeah, for sure. Changing your tone of voice. Absolutely. It's all those little things that we are trained as clinicians very early on to use that motivational interviewing brings up again in ways that I'm like, oh, I constantly have to be thinking about this with my adolescents because they are so challenging. The best part about adolescents though, and you picked up on this, Nicole, is they will tell you what they want. And so I go over this a little bit later with advice or affirmations, but like they're gonna communicate with you what they're needing and what they're not getting. And I think that's the best thing, especially when you build that relationship with them. When you have that rapport, oh my gosh, it's magic in the office. So guiding, we've really touched on this a little bit, but because it is one of those basic MI skills, I'll just go over it briefly. It's a way of directing and following the client. We're using their listening skills. This is where you get to use your expertise. Motivational interviewing, while it's okay to do on its own, the best part is you get to use it with other things you've been trained in. I've been trained in DBT, play therapy, all those fun things. It works best when you use it with other therapeutic interventions that you're already doing. And I love that because it makes everything in a weird way a lot easier, even though you're like combining two things. When you get stuck using one skill, if you just reword it a little bit with motivational interviewing, the results are insane. It's like the light bulbs go off for the adolescents. I've been seeing it in my office for a few months now, and it's so cool to see them actually thinking through what changes am I going to make. There are 4 fundamental skills that we're going to use in your packet. It is there's a little worksheet on it.
Page 3.
Page 3. Mhm. So Drayson was wonderful enough to create this awesome little worksheet for us to use. We're going to start, I'm way ahead of time, so we're going to keep going. We're going to start by going back to Bree's story, if you guys remember that.
Can we show the second video?
Oh, sure. Pause. We're going to show video.
Hold on.
You ready, Clara?
No, 1 second. Okay.
So again, we're trying to figure out how to help a young person change their story. It's kind of a framework that we're working on, and this is in the hero's journey. This is the supreme ordeal. It's how do they find a mentor? How do they find some help while they're still struggling, and where that goes. And our team thinks these represent really well what we see on a regular basis of what's going on with young people. No. Sorry. Let's just go forward.
YouTube always wants us to replay our videos. So we're going to talk about there are 4 main skills with motivational interviewing. I will note there are a lot of other skills within motivational interviewing, but I thought these are like the 4 fundamental things that if you walk away today knowing how to use these in a way to engage your adolescents, I think you'll see a lot of cool changes happening in your office. The goal of the worksheet that we have for you, feel free to think about like writing examples down. I know for me, a challenge I've had, especially with affirmations and reflections, is sometimes I'm like, oh dang, especially pregnancy brain, it's nothing. I have a hard time. So I like writing some ideas down. That way I can get practice with that before going into another session with clients, or especially with affirmations, I love writing them down with my clients so they can take it home. And that's been something that's been really exciting to see in the office. Okay. I want you to take 3 minutes to go read through Bree's story again on your own.
It's on page 2.
On page 2. Highlight some of the things that you feel like stand out as you're reading her story. I want her story to be fresh in your mind as we go over the 4 skills. I'll give you guys another 30 seconds. Let me know if I'm longer than that. Okay. All right, so ours is starting with open-ended questions. Open-ended questions allow you to take your client to a deeper level. A lot of adolescents have a really hard time wanting to share anything. They're like, they'll be a tight box as long as you let them. Or, on the other hand, they'll tell you what they think you want to hear. So there's a lot of parroting happening. If I just tell them what I think mom and dad want to hear, then I'll get out of here and it'll be great. But that's not how motivational interviewing works. There's no movement if they just tell us what they think we want to hear. So our goal is to take them to the next level and seeing what they can bring up emotionally and process through. This allows them to explore their internal experiences within a safe environment in our office. It also gives clients the ability to speak more with additional engagement about their story, their internal narrative, what's going on with them. Ensures clients don't answer with a yes or no answer response or with like a very limited one-worded answer. When I first started out as a therapist and I wasn't overly wonderful at open-ended questions, I got a lot of yeses and no's. And I was like, come on, guys, come on. Right? Open-ended questions, you'll get there, and the adolescents engage with you a little more. They hear that you're trying to build that relationship, that you're invested in them, and they want that. This is also great to use during intake sessions to gain further information about what's actually going on. So as you guys, yes, Bree's gonna walk into your office.
I want to add on open-ended questions. One of the benefits I see is that kids, again, young adolescents don't just share random stuff. So if you ask an open-ended question, and even if their answer doesn't actually feel directed towards your question, it is highly likely that they are sharing something that is meaningful to them. And your job is to figure out how to use and understand that, not necessarily. And so open-ended questions allow for them to say something. Because if they say something, it probably has some meaning or use. And then the other skills allow you to play with that a little bit.
So Bree's gonna walk into our office. We're gonna say it's her first time that she's meeting with us. You have the background of her story beforehand. At your table, think of 2 to 3 open-ended questions you could ask her based on what you learned. So get to know your table mates a little. Back together. Proposing. We ask Bree. Anybody have any? Oh, Anna.
What questions, what brings you here today? What's your opinion? What's happening? Lots of what?
Lots of what question? What brings you here today? And what was the second one?
What's your opinion?
What's
about
your opinion?
What's going on? Something like that.
What's your opinion about what's going on? Like,
Allison said, what does a typical day look like for you?
online, we have what does a typical day look like for you? That's also a great one. Yeah, in the back.
I wanted to know more about.
Yeah, tell me more about your relationship with your parents. Very, very important one.
When is the last time you felt understood?
When is the last time you felt understood? I like that one.
Tabitha says, help me understand what it's like not to be understood.
What it's like to not be understood.
Like, help me as a therapist understand what it's like to not be understood
Okay. So as a therapist, help me understand what it's like to not feel understood.
or be understood. Yeah.
Awesome. Clearly, you guys are fantastic. No open-ended questions. Yeah.
I'm a little nervous speaking in public, but I was at a training a few years ago where they pointed out that sometimes when you ask too many questions, it starts to feel like an interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
To challenge you and it's, asking a question that's not in the form of a question, unlike Jeopardy, but so I got a really good way of working with time. When I came back first, I was really excited. I had this, new skill I was going to use. And when he came into my office, I told him all about it. And I said, so I'm going to go as far into our session as I can without asking you any questions. Is that okay with you? Of course, he laughed at me, broke the ice, and he wasn't very good after that.
That's awesome. Beautiful. You also bring up a great point. We're going to get to reflections here in a little bit, but yes, there is like a limit to how many open-ended questions in general that you can ask someone before it does become an interrogation, before teens are going to go, no, thank you, I don't like this anymore. So the recommendation with motivational interviewing is for every one open-ended question you ask, add in 2 reflections. Yes, sorry. Okay, next we're going to go over affirmations. These are short, simple statements that convey a positive or encouraging message. We talked a little bit earlier about how the teens can sniff out the BS, so be careful when you're using affirmations. One of the books that I was reading prior to the CEU talks about, while the short statements are great, oftentimes if you're going to say something like, you are enough, or wow, you're smart, they kind of go, is that like a pre-recorded response? Like, you don't really know me well enough to just, I mean, you could say that to anyone, right? So they're not going to buy into what you're selling at that point of you are enough, even if you do 100% believe it. So it just depends on the relationship that you have with your client at that moment. Examples that I have on here are ones that I've used with my clients, and every single time I use a you statement for an affirmation, I love to see them go, you're right. Like are you sure? Is that really me? So I've said you're worthy of taking up space in this world. This is one that a client and I were working on affirmations for a while, and they decided that they liked this one so much, they were going to spend some time creating a little piece of art that had that affirmation on it that they could take home with them. And now they are at college and they should go with them. And I just think that's really cool. So in the last year, we've gone from, I don't even believe that I'm worthy of taking up space in this world, to I can believe this statement, not fully, but more so than I did a year ago. And I think that's awesome. And I always bring that one up with them too. How are you feeling about being worthy today? You knew what you needed in that situation, and you're doing it so well navigating this. Another thing that I was reading within the motivational interview and stuff is recommending that we don't use I statements like, I see you're doing really well right now. That's not an affirmation, and that puts it back on you and less on the client. And we want the client to feel empowered. We want the client to be in control of the situation. And if we put ourselves into that, it's kind of taking away some of the power and control that they have. We're gonna do another activity. It's called the I am activity. And the electronic only packet, it is on page 9. And I'm going to,
Can you put it on the screen?
yes, please. This is something we do in group regularly. Hold on, we'll get there. It's a great gauge to me to see how clients are feeling about themselves. Where's their self-worth at? But also, it's a great way for them to connect with other people. So, do we have this printed out at all? No, okay. They will go through this over like two minutes, and they answer, I am not, I am I value, I love, I hate. And they get to answer in 1 or 2 little boxes what they want there. Sometimes the wheels are turning, but they're like, I got nothing for you right now. So I say that's okay, because oftentimes I've done this a couple times within group and some people repeat it. But once they have a few minutes to fill out this portion, then they can go on to the next portion. This is great for group, or even you could do it within family work. You would have them share this piece of paper around the room, and other people are going to write what they see in that person. And I often encourage, especially with adolescents, to give a little bit more than so-and-so is great or so-and-so is awesome. Again, going back to those short affirmations that you're like, I'm not really feeling that. So we've given them words to use before as well. Like, this is an example of what you can put here that's helpful. I would be really interested if anybody did this within family work to see how it would go. Because after you do the positive things you like about that person gets to read all of them. And I think that is so powerful for all of the adolescents. A lot of times they'll go, I wouldn't have picked that for myself. It's awesome, I think, for them to realize that people see them differently than they see themselves, especially when their advisor is so negative. Oftentimes they like 100% believe that they are not worthy of anything, that they're a piece of junk. And so to see that someone sees something positive in them is so amazing as well. And then after they do that, then they go through, and the next 2 years, this is what I want to say about myself. So working on what motivational interviewing calls a change plan, and we'll get there. So that is the I am activity. We're going to move on to reflections next. This is stating what you heard them say with added meaning. It's a way of showing your empathy and understanding of their perspective. It's a way to validate them, which they always love. This gives you a chance to test your theory about what they're experiencing. My favorite part about reflections is that they're going to tell you if you're right or wrong. Sometimes they might not respond at all. In those moments, it might be a little awkward. But when they tell you, actually, this is what's going on, I so appreciate that. Because sometimes my mind is in a different headspace than when they're where they're at. And it's okay to be wrong as a therapist, right? Like, they know their life a lot better than I do. I don't get to live it. They live it and get to share it with me. And you can never overuse reflections. Like I said, they love the reflections. So going back to open-ended questions, these are what you want to use more than the open-ended questions or the closed questions. There are simple reflections, which is just repeating or paraphrasing the words that they said, not necessarily adding a whole lot of meaning to it, just to show that you're reflecting back what you heard them say. And complex reflections are where you're adding in those emotion words. You can use metaphors. This is a great time acceptance and commitment therapy, DAV, lots of metaphors there. It's a great time to add in some of those other tips and tricks that you know as a therapist within conversation you're having with them. I will tell people, don't use the word but, like, just end your sentence and move on. Because anytime you add in the word but, you're negating everything you said up until that point. And that just minimizes the reflection that you're giving back to them, and it feels less important. So at your tables, I want you to take another couple of minutes and go over some affirmations you could come up with for Bree, and what reflections you could use based off of the case study, because I know we don't have any information as to what she's sharing with us when she would actually walk into our office. But based off of everything you've been given so far, go ahead and come up with some affirmations and reflections. All right, back together. push for lunch in 20 minutes. What did you guys come up with for some affirmations?
You've been hanging on to a lot and you are resilient.
Yes. You've been hanging on to a lot and you are resilient.
You are courageous.
You are courageous. Yes.
You've already established some really good coping with your art and your journal.
You've already established some good coping with your art and your journal. Very true. What were some of the ones we had online?
It sounds like you're hurting.
It sounds like you're really hurting and you feel like no one sees you or understands you. It takes courage to share your feelings. Sounds like you're coping in the best way you know how and that you might be open to trying some new ways at some point. It's definitely scared to try new things so you can set the pace because you know you best. That's more of a reflection, I think.
Yeah.
So from that, leading into reflection, what you guys come up with? Do you have one?
Yeah, sure. It sounds like school may not be challenging enough for you.
Sounds like school may not be challenging enough for you. Oh, yeah. Everything's boring.
Losing your friends and make you feel very isolated.
Your friends make you feel very isolated.
Now, losing your friends.
Losing your friends makes you feel very isolated. You have one more.
I have one from Kelsey.
An online one is you haven't given up on yourself, and by coming here today, you're showing her how dedicated you are to caring for yourself. We are going to touch base on summaries. That's the last part of ORS. This is piecing together what they have been saying in regards to their desire for change and what's going on in their life. With summaries, lots of repetition is needed. A lot of times I think teens feel like we focus on the negative aspects of what's going on in their lives. Smoking or kicked out of school, another in-school suspension. And if we focus too much on the negative, they're going to completely shut down and not want to hear it. Because they already feel bad enough about that, right? Maybe one of their advisors is saying, you can never do it right. And our goal is to focus on some more of those positive pieces, their values, their strengths, and showing them that even though things aren't super great right now, it doesn't always have to be like that, and that they are showing up in some way that makes them show that they want to change. So an example I have, this is back to the person that identified themselves as lazy earlier. In a session we were chatting and I said, you shared how you long to have friendships and described feeling really isolated. You've also talked about how you don't want to initiate contact with peers and wish friendships automatically occurred after introducing your name. And wonder what you're needing to take that first step towards reaching out to them. A lot of times summaries can be great for adding in what we'll go over likely after lunch is what we call a change plan. And so our goal is for them to come up with something on their own of what they want to change. Because remember, we don't get to be in control. If I told them to go do X, Y, and Z, they'd probably look at me and be like, no, thank you. So a lot of this is them deciding what, after we're saying, this is what we're seeing. On one hand, I see you doing this, but you've also described doing X, Y, and Z. How can we help you to make that next step or take that step towards whatever your goal is? they tend to respond really well to that. And a lot of times I think they don't feel like they've had control for so long that when you ask them about it and giving it back to them, there's this shock portion that they have to go through of, I don't know, nobody's really asked me that. So summaries are fantastic. We won't have to go through that portion on the worksheet that we've been going through. To summarize all 4 of these skills, when you find the best way to use them for you within your clinical work, a lot of change can happen with the individuals that you're seeing. It just takes a lot of practice.
I want to add to summaries or summary reflections is really good. We see in group, and I see it with individuals, where they process out loud, or, you know, and they're just talking and they're just going and going and going. And sometimes in a group, that's not a great thing. But this ability to, if you can find a pause or slip in there and really mix these together, like a summary reflection means you were listening to what they said. You can affirm that that is clearly all important stuff to them, and say we need to transition to either something individually with them, or, and, you know, as a group, we're going to learn some skills to deal with what you're doing there. And so I find these summaries or summary reflections to be really good at helping the guiding process to use motivational interviewing, instead of just, because sometimes we think we get them talking and that's a good thing. It is a good thing, but sometimes they're just talking and we're not using the time or the session to guide them towards something that's going to make their life more vital going forward.
Well, I think when you can use all 4 of these in a way, you're going to get less of the parroting that I think I just tend to see so much parroting. And I'm like, is that you or your mom talking to me right now? I say that very lovingly. Because they're just so used to, this is how I get out of a situation. This is how I've learned how to cope. And what we're trying to teach them is you have to sit with those uncomfortable emotions. And that is so hard for them, especially having been fairly dysregulated over the past few years with COVID. I just think we're seeing a lot more of that emotional dysregulation. And this is a great way to help them feel those emotions in a safe way in which we can help them identify these are ways that you can work towards regulating again.
Still a good time for questions.
Anybody have any questions? We have about like 12 minutes until lunch.
I do have one. Can you talk about maybe your experience and exposure with the overlaps of anxiety and potentially an eating disorder in male adolescent age of 16?
That was very specific. I was like, I can.
Wow. Okay, so the question is wanting to know more about how to use these skills when overlapping with a male adolescent around the age of 16 who's experiencing some anxiety and an eating disorder. Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do for you is recommend the book that I have, like, literally, it's all youth and adolescent-based interventions with motivational interviewing, and within that book, I'll give you the name of it here on break. It goes over eating disorder, how to use motivational interviewing for adolescents with eating disorders, anxiety disorders, substance use, gaming problems. I mean, this book is literally a how to use motivational interviewing in any situation with adolescents. Hold on one second. Let me pull up my resources page.
And we have a copy of that book over there that you can look at, Motivational Interviewing with Adolescents. So
yeah, it's called Motivational Interviewing with Adolescents and Young Adults. It's by Nar, King, and Suarez. And they take a lot of, like, they literally walk you through the whole motivational interviewing process. And it is fantastic. Unfortunately, with eating disorders, I tend to refer on. That is just a place that I'm not comfortable with. I've done a little bit of that, but anxiety is my jam.
the name one more time.
Mhm. Motivational Interviewing with Adolescents and Young Adults. It's by NAR, N-A-A-R -King, and Suarez, Suarez. Jason's gonna hold up a copy.
On Amazon, it looks like that.
I do have 2 questions.
The distinction between an anxiety attack and a panic attack.
Yes, the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack. So I don't believe anxiety attacks are really in the full-on DSM. I think that's more of a term that we as clinicians have come up with. Panic attacks, you're gonna visually see it. Versus when I think of someone telling me they had an anxiety attack, their anxiety got really, really bad and they had a hard time regulating. That doesn't necessarily mean that their response is an outward response. It's more of an internalized response.
I'll add to that. We talked about that. Also, anxiety attack is, there is something that's causing them to be anxious. And then the anxiety, they can have a lot of feelings of a panic attack. But it's regarding a situation, they feel something, where a panic attack is just out of nowhere. Anxiety attack could last from minutes to hours to days. Panic attack usually lasts about 2 minutes.
I have somebody.
There was an online question.
Go ahead.
Can we go back to the massive criteria and health insurance in adolescent?
Okay, yes, we can do that, and I think there's a sheet on that, so we can review that after lunch. The adolescents versus adults and criteria.
For depression.
Yeah, we have one for depression, so yes.
And then you want to answer that?
Yeah, and then we'll come back.
So the narcissism versus passion for the tribe. I feel like I want to be careful how I word this, but with some of the adolescents I treat, there is this strong identification with like a diagnosis. I like kind of all the language that was used. It kind of becomes their lens. And so, how do you like finesse not bashing their tribe or what they're finding like validation in? Pulling them back a little bit, because I feel like it just kind of shows up in lots of, it's just, I don't know, I'm nervous to say, I just don't want to, you know what I'm
I
trying
think
to
we can
kind of.
answer that, and we're gonna spend some of the afternoon finishing up the DNAV stuff.
Okay,
But they are using their diagnosis as a defense mechanism, and we're gonna talk about that really specifically after lunch.
yeah,
And then how do you, all of these tools we're talking about to get them to confront those defense mechanisms,
nice,
which doesn't make it, I don't have to tell them that they're doing that.
right,
They get to choose, but then we're teaching the skill of how to confront your defense mechanism.
yeah,
And so we will go over that, but thinking about that kind of like an avatar in a video game or anything else, this online presence that's not really me, all kind of come together. So the imposters and all of that kind of comes together, that I need this label to feel okay in the world.
yeah.
How do you handle parents who want to speed up the process because some changes take years?
How do you handle parents who want to speed up the process when the process takes years? Well, that is a loaded question.
Called IOP, Intensive Outpatient Program.
Jason says IOP, but yes, I think it's really challenging. Oftentimes I tend to make some phone calls, and you have to remind parents that just because they want to see X, Y, and Z change, that doesn't mean their youth is on the board with those changes.
In dialectics would say you're walking the middle path, which means they want the kid to speed up and you need to work on them slowing down at the same time. I mean, both those things need to happen. And so they move closer to the middle.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times with that too, and we'll talk about this after lunch, when you get to a change plan with motivational interviewing, clients are walking out of your office with, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z this week. And so a lot of parents who have been like, Katie, we're not moving. This is the same thing over and over. I'm like, okay, let's give them something that they have to take away and do at the end of every session. And their goal is to share it with the parents. Does the youth particularly enjoy that?
I don't know, but it's worked for some of my clients where they either have to do something as a family together or they have to do something individually, and just giving them that little homework piece can be really impactful, and you can see some change, and the parent gets a little bit of what they want, but the client is still deciding what goal they're setting, so they're still in charge when they're leaving your office too.
So you guys have more compliant parents, because you, I'm sure, are aware of legislation that came out for schools in Kansas where we cannot do risk assessments without parent permission any longer. So we cannot go and do our suicide assessments. We can't assess risks without first calling. So basically, oh, hold up a second, you're telling me this, let me go call your parent. And if they say no,
Document.
Yeah.
and we document it, and we're trying to figure out, but it's just so those parents that don't feel their student.
That are
that's
minimizing.
the scary thing for us in some of our environments, and how we get them referred out.
Two institutions that we haven't figured out how to fix permanently, parents and schools. Our next, right there. And insurance, yeah. I know we had a couple questions at the back, and we really are kind of committed to getting you out of here by 10:30. I saw your hand. Okay, Corey, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to come back to the electronic only packet, the I am sheet we showed.
Yeah.
The bottom one starts to go negative. You know, I am unlovable because, it says I'm good because, but I'm bad because. So I just didn't know like how you dealt with those. Maybe that could come under the, right? I assume that my reports come out and negate all positive with those negative.
So the sheet is actually designed to do some self-view stuff, or that portion of it. So really taking a good look at themselves, you know, and kind of balancing it out. And then we use it. So it's not strictly an affirmation. We were just trying to pull out an example of how we do those affirmations in group, and that's part of the process. But increasing self-view and their own context of their environment and how they see themselves is a key part of DNAB. So that's what, that sheet's not just one thing, I guess. That,
My question's much more simpler than the last one. If we're here in person, do we still need to do the test online?
if you were here the whole time, no, you'll get to take your certificate get home. I got a question right here.
Okay, wait, the example she just gave, my understanding is if you assess, or if you're thinking, your hypotheses without doing a formal assessment, that child is suicidal, the parent says no, they are refusing to take action, that's a child protection call. Because that's under medical neglect.
Well, yeah, it depends on your school's, the school's policy.
Yeah. All right, I think it's a great time to take a lunch.